Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 117, and you're watching two people on the opposite side of a country talk about Anglican news in law. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm Allan Haley, and today is August 25th, 2014.
Okay, it's not George, it's Allan. And George is moving this week, and so we're not going to get a lot of George on tape. He's moving to his new church in right outside of Orlando, and he's got a moving truck outside. He's packing boxes. He's dealing with a wife who has lots of clothes. You need to be praying for George and his wife. So Al and I are going to cover a little bit about the news today, and there's lots of legal news going on. We're going to talk about San Joaquin, the Diocese of South Carolina, and some national news about justice. Let's start with San Joaquin. You're probably in the last throes of filing briefs back and forth. What's the latest update?
Okay, well, we're almost down to the wire on getting a settled form of the judgment, the final judgment in the case at the trial level. Mm-hmm. And that basically says all the property goes over to the Rump Group. And we've gone back and forth on it. Now the judge has proposed a version, and we're supposed to let him know today our final positions. Then he will enter judgment. And then as soon as that judgment is entered, very shortly thereafter, we will file a notice of appeal in the trial court, taking the case back up to the 5th District Court of Appeal, which had sent it back originally after reversing a trial court decision in 2010. So the reason we're having to take this up on appeal is that Bishop Eric Menees tried to sit down and see if there was room to settle the case with his counterpart, Bishop David Rice, on the Episcopal side. And Bishop Rice informed him that no, the rules were laid down for him that he had to follow, that there would be no sales of property. In other words, the Anglicans couldn't purchase their property from the Episcopalians at any price. And there's no long-term arrangements that would be made either to accommodate them in the properties.
Well, Bishop Menees came to this meeting with a large checkbook. He had a lot of money to offer.
Well, right, in the sense that they didn't succeed in taking all the money from the Anglican Diocese, and he's done an excellent job in raising money for defense funds and getting things coordinated there. So he did have something to bring to the table, but it just was not going to count because the rules are, under the Episcopal Church, so long as presiding Bishop Jeffrey Shorey is there, there will be no sales of any formerly Episcopal churches to formerly Episcopal congregations.
Is that not a form of discrimination that we could sue for?
Well, race, color, I don't know whether it's religion is one of the things that is discriminatory, but it's certainly a discriminatory stance, yes. Mm-hmm. And it's seen because the tendency at the national level is to view these split-off groups as competition, quote-unquote, which is the worst possible way for me that I can imagine to view a church. Mm-hmm. A church being in competition with other churches for what? For souls? You can't you can't make the decision over that, and all you can do is hope that you get enough people listening to you every Sunday to get the Word of God truly preached, and to mend their lives to the degree that they're each able to do so in light of the Word they hear. So it's going to be something, the idea is to reach as many people as you can, not just the other people. And in fact, you're doing a worse job, it seems to me, if you see yourself as in competition with somebody who's already got his act together and is meeting and saying that services every Sunday. You don't need to see yourself as in competition with them, but that's apparently the way it happens at 8:15.
Now, this has been one of the longest Anglican lawsuit cases in American history. It started in 2008. When do you suspect you'll finally have a final decision in the appeals court?
Well, because of the way this trial judge chose to do things, we unfortunately, I think, are in for another long haul of another 4 or 5 years. Now, here's the reason why. In the 2010 decision, when the Court of Appeals sent the case back for trial, in reversing a trial court decision that tried to end it on summary judgment, it happened to answer one of our arguments on appeal we said that the Rump Diocese at that time in 2008 could not be a proper plaintiff in the case because it had not been admitted to union with General Convention. This was 2008, remember, and General Convention wasn't due to meet until 2009. So we said it can't possibly be a proper diocese in the Episcopal Church. The appellate court answered that with a statement in the opinion saying that no, it's the continuity of the diocese as a diocese within the Episcopal Church is an ecclesiastical fact which is settled for all points and purposes by the courts. It's settled when the Episcopal Church recognizes this group as a diocese. So that put an end to that argument on the standing. But when the case came back down to trial, the plaintiffs, the Rump group, said to the judge, look, the appellate court has already decided this case. It said that the continuity is a settled ecclesiastical fact, therefore dioceses can't leave the church. And we said, wait a minute, no, it doesn't mean that. And they said, yes, it does. You can just go read it. And so the trial court judge bought that argument, unfortunately, and held that there was no need to really try anything because, as a matter of fact, this diocese could not properly leave the Episcopal Church as the appellate court, quote unquote, had already ruled. So now we have to take it back up again to the Court of Appeals to say, you didn't really mean things that way, did you? We're going to have to and the Court of Appeals, I'm quite sure, is going to say, no, we didn't mean it in that sense because we sent it back to you to decide all these things under neutral principles. And you now send it, we could have simply, if that's the way we'd felt, we could have simply ended the case right then and there if a diocese couldn't leave the church. We send it back to be tried on neutral principles, and that's what the trial court should have done. So I'm looking for the appellate court once again to reverse the trial court, send it back for another trial, and we probably won't be done with this case until 2018, 2020. It could become the longest running church dispute in the history of the Episcopal Church.
Well, it is crazy. I mean, when you look at how law is supposed to work, a judge is supposed to take what into account? Obviously, the U.S. Constitution, the state constitution, and other laws. How does that work out as far as what he picks to choose first? Obviously, we have freedom of association, but that doesn't seem to matter here.
No, and as I say, he was told by the Court of Appeals to take a look at the church bylaws, the church governing documents, the Constitution and canons, and the deeds of the property. And instead he simply looked at the opinion of the Court of Appeal and said, I don't have to do any of that stuff, even though the opinion told him to. And so, yeah, he went with their version of things because it was an easier way to resolve it and didn't involve anything complicated. And so therefore, here we are. This is now judgment. So, yeah, the freedom of association didn't even come into play because although if you hold as a matter of law a diocese can't leave a church, what happens to its First Amendment freedom? And that was another one of the freedom elements that the Court of Appeals specifically enumerated. It said the freedom of corporations and associations, freedom under the First Amendment. So that was one of the things he was supposed to consider, and it should have been a clue to him that no, you shouldn't go where the plaintiffs are trying to lead you because it's not right.
Oh. All right, so we covered the depressing stuff going on in California. In fact, there was an earthquake there yesterday. How far north of San Fran do you live?
I'm northeast of San Francisco, about 250 miles.
Oh, so you didn't feel any rumbling?
No, we didn't wake up, but I have a lot of friends down in the wine industry in Napa, and I know some who were, seriously affected. The barrels were all shaken off their racks, and fortunately, I didn't hear of any tanks rupturing, but I did hear, and in the retail stores, lots and lots of lost bottles and spilled on the floor and everything.
Yeah, I'm a wine connoisseur, and it was a very sad day for me, but no loss of life, and
right.
That's life on the West Coast.
That's it.
Every 25 years there's a little rumbling going on. Right. Let's move on to the East Coast and talk about the Diocese of South Carolina. They put out a press release last week saying that they are going to come under the Global South as far as having ecumenical oversight over them. And I remember early on in the days of all this court stuff going on that some dioceses were afraid to associate with other non-American jurisdictions because it would end up badly in court, or the court would look disdainfully upon that. How does this work as far as the Diocese of South Carolina?
It will not affect the litigation in the Diocese of South Carolina. Uh, this is purely an ecclesiastical happening. I think what you might be remembering is that in the early stages of the Virginia litigation, when they were applying what was called Virginia's division statute, there was language in there about how joining a denomination and so on, and they were concerned about trying to comply with the literal terms of the statute until, of course, later the Virginia Supreme Court interpreted it completely different from everyone else and made it irrelevant to the case. So once again, the courts, step in and say, "You think this is what you should do? No, no, no. This is what you better do."
Clearly, they like wine as well. So,
right. So that's a good result. In South Carolina, they're also in the process of filing post briefs with the court, and she will give a decision probably toward the end of October and early November.
That's good. So this has been an interesting week for law, and we've been watching what's been going on in Ferguson for the last 2 weeks, and we're having what we call race riots again. And it's not fed in the same way it was back in like the Watts riots and in New Jersey and stuff like that. This is a different time and a different place. But as humans, we have the same reaction we always do. And I wanted to talk to you, because you're a legal expert, because the governor of Missouri and the family of Michael Brown are demanding justice. And I think the term is ill-defined by them. I've always understood justice to be access to the system, not an outcome. Can you help me with that?
Yeah. There's two things. There's procedural justice, and then there's substantive justice. And the procedural justice is talking access to the system and having equal opportunity to be represented. Justice is blind in all the characteristics. She's wearing a blindfold and holding a scale in balance. And so the idea is that the scale is not supposed to be affected by anything justice could see were she not blindfolded. Who is appearing in front of her should not matter. Color of skin, wealth, all those other factors that we use in judging people and making misjudgings of people, those are irrelevant, supposedly, to the scales of justice. And what I think the demands that I'm hearing from the community, the black community in Ferguson, from Eric Holder and from Governor Nixon, are for things like what are traditionally called social justice. And social justice has to do with group politics and with equating past wrongs, for example, the slavery and so on. And it's not something you can achieve in the courts. It's very troubling, in fact, to have social justice interjected in the court, because that introduces precisely the element that justice itself is supposed to be blind to. We're supposed to decide on the facts. What happened? Was this young man, was he actually executed gangland style while face down on the street, or was he actually rushing the police officer and about to bowl him over when the bullet finally that stopped him hit him in the head? So the issue is, what are the facts, what is shown by the evidence, and then can we apply the law to those facts? And it becomes very difficult what happens when the media gets in there and takes the very first spin or story that gets out. And of course, in that case, the story that they ran and snatched with right from the very beginning was the story of his accomplice, the fellow who was robbing the store along with him just a few minutes earlier. And he was the one who put out this narrative of Michael Brown's having been executed. And everybody, of course, jumped on that. And the community, the black community, jumped on it, and the family jumped on it. And of course, then the outside professionals, Al Sharpton and Reverend Jackson, these people came in, the NAACP got involved, and it just turned it into a whole mushroom of race prejudice and race factors that justice cannot deal with.
However, if this were 1960 or 1965, it would be okay to maintain those prejudices, because that was kind of the police state that existed in LA at the time, New Jersey, Alabama, Birmingham, Montgomery, Alabama. There was a prejudice and oppression by the police at that time. But to carry that on, 30, 40 years later...
Yeah, which makes it all the more troubling now
Yeah.
to have people claim that it's still just as bad as it was back then.
You know, it,
It's not, and
it's not. I mean, we have an African American president. We have an
right,
African American attorney general. We have shown that there's no limit to what an African American person of color, whether you're Mexican, Asian, black, color really does not have the ostriches it used to have. Now, yes, racism still exists. It always will for all mankind for all time. We always will have prejudice, built-in prejudice to us. It is the fallen man we are. But as a country, we're no longer as racist as we used to be, and it does get better all the time. Stuff like this takes us back 10, 20 years in race
huh,
in race relations, and we're now reliving the 60s in St. Louis, Missouri.
yeah, and I can't condemn enough the outpourings of people like Spike Lee.
Hmm.
That, for example, as the story began to change, as more and more the narrative came out that maybe Michael Brown wasn't executed from the back, that he was shot from behind while rushing the police officer, Spike Lee came out with a pronouncement saying to the effect that, well, once he's acquitted, meaning Wilson, once he's acquitted, then let's really burn the place down.
Hmm.
So, in other words, they're already anticipating the judgment and based on the actual evidence that now is coming out, and they're saying, we don't care what the evidence shows, it's racism and prejudice. And against that attitude, there's nothing that can be done other than to try to just censor it, call it what it is, and turn away from it, because it's simply a hateful sentiment that doesn't belong in our society.
It is ironic because if this were 1960, we would call this a lynching, where
Right,
a black person was tried without a trial, was hung up on the front lawn of their house because they moved to the wrong neighborhood, they joined the wrong church, any host of reasons. Now we have a white officer involved in the shooting of a person who was involved in a crime moments before, and this white officer is being lynched because they don't want a trial. That's not the justice they seek. The
right.
justice they seek is for the 50, 60 years of pain they suffered being black in America. And, I don't think that the death of this officer is going to appease them.
Oh no, it particularly won't. It will just feed the machine some more if it were to come to that. In fact, the media, being the willing accomplice to all this, they even published his address, pictures of his home.
Hmm.
They were inviting people to go there and just lynch him. It was just incredible. And I'm ashamed for the media in this country. I'm ashamed for all the people that have worked to fire this up. From their outside agitators coming in from all over the country who are leading the nighttime rioting. Most of the people that were arrested in the last few nights of unrest in Ferguson have been people from far away. And so this is just they're using Ferguson as a tool. They're using the story that this black accomplice first put out as just a tool to grab everyone and to raise passions and to get things, apparently there are people who thrive on this kind of unrest and violence.
Hmm.
And that's what we're seeing happen.
Now, for those in the know, August 11th in Los Angeles, a African American cop shot an unarmed white teenager. Um, Nothing.
Nothing, right?
Nobody knew anything. What, really? Yeah, really. And this
And
is
every night in Chicago too, 10 times more murders of shootings of black people take place. And where's the media there? Where's the
yeah.
media covering the story?
Well,
Yeah.
we have
Where's Al Sharpton when he really could say something?
we have learned from Ferguson that the only people allowed to kill black people are black people. And it's a sad fact. Now let's talk about the role of churches in this. Since the time of slavery, churches have rightfully stood at the forefront of proclaiming slavery is wrong, and it's time to proclaim this new media thing going on is wrong, and churches need to step forward and offer a peaceful solution to this. It's not going to be found in the government. It's not going to be found in Eric Holder. It's not going to be found. How did we ever get another politician named Nixon?
Yeah, right.
He's done a wonderful job, hasn't he?
Yeah, right. And Obama himself has been one of the most divisive presidents in history, I'm sorry to say. Because he's constantly out there making comments about, like, the Cambridge cops, and when they arrested the black professor from Harvard, I can't remember, and then they jumped in on the Philadelphia voter oppression by the Black Panthers. So this has not been a good 8 years or 6 years so far in terms of a president who you think was elected to calm race relations and indirectly has done an awful lot to exacerbate them.
Well, my advice as we close out this segment, we're going on 20 minutes. Oh, we went long. Is to, if you're going to elect anybody, black, white, brown, Asian, make sure they're not living in the 60s.
Yeah, right.